Welcome, folks. This is Eddie Carson, and you're listening to Race Matters here at WJOP, Joppa Radio, Newburyport, Massachusetts. You can find the show on SoundCloud, also on YouTube. We're excited that you are going to kind of come lean into the funk of things. I'm really looking forward to this episode here as I have Professor Dr. Mark Elrod, who's a political scientist out of the University of Central Arkansas in Conway, Arkansas. Mark Elrod is an expert when it comes to dealing with state and national politics, international relations, political theory, and foreign affairs and foreign relations. He's the jack of all trade when it comes to a lot of stuff, and he brings a high degree of expertise, particularly because one of the things that we want to delve into as we're getting super close to the 2024 national election here, getting an understanding of the dynamics that's happening in terms of the lead up, what may actually happen. I don't know if Brother Elrod's prophetic or not. He may answer that to him for us and everything here. But what I like to do is I want to invite this brother on to the flow, say hello, and maybe add some commentary about himself that I didn't share. Professor, welcome to Race Matters.
Eddie, it's good to see you, and hello to everybody in Massachusetts. I have been teaching at the University of Central Arkansas for about 12 years. Before that, I taught up the road in Searcy, Arkansas, at another college, Harding University, and that's where I met Eddie in one of the best classes of young minds that I've ever taught there. And it's flattering to me to hear that you guys have stayed in touch over the years, you and Jeff and Philip and others, and that warms the heart of an old professor like me when he hears his students are staying in touch with each other. And I can't help but mention that after I finished my undergraduate work, I did my grad work and stayed in Nashville and did my graduate work at Vanderbilt. And knowing that Eddie is a native of Alabama, I couldn't help but mentioning the tremendous upset. That's the only way. Probably is the biggest upset in sports I've ever seen. And I'd like to point out that the last time Vanderbilt beat Alabama was my first year at Vanderbilt in grad school. And I don't believe correlation's causation, but maybe me finishing there and leaving was why they had such a difficult time winning football games.
So you so
Um,
this is because of you that Vanderbilt can't seem to win football
I'm
games.
not saying that. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
you have to look at, the timeline and everything. The very first game I did see, Vanderbilt, Alabama, was the next year, and Vandy lost 64-0. So, yeah, I don't think it has anything to do with me. I think it has a lot to do with small private schools competing against big schools like Alabama and Tennessee and others. But I'm a native of Delaware. I'm from the East Coast, from the Northeast. I grew up about 8 miles from where Joe Biden lives. Never met the president, but I know his neighborhood. And having a son of Delaware in the White House is quite surprising, and I'm very, very proud of somebody from our state doing that. Arkansas politics has changed a lot since I came here in 1987, and we can talk more about that later if you want. But um, it's an interesting state. Arkansas was the 25th state, which puts us right in the middle. We're the neurotic middle child when it comes to states of the union. Uh, Politics is interesting here, but in terms of the upcoming presidential election, I will go ahead and make a prediction since you.
I love it. Absolutely.
Arkansas's 6 electoral votes will go to Donald Trump.
You
Uh,
know, I don't think that counts as being prophetic.
yeah, it's more like being a realist. And as much as I hate to say that to my Democratic friends in the state, the fact of the matter is in a very short period of time, very quickly, between 2008 and 2012 or so, Arkansas flipped from being a blue state to a red state, like many southern states. And in fact, Arkansas was the kind of one late to the party. We were one of the southern states that it took a relatively longer time for us to flip our legislature and our national representatives and our governor to the Republican Party. And there's a couple of different theories about that if you want to go into
I
that.
would
But
love to. Absolutely.
well, the two theories are, one is the more complex one is that um, starting in about 2005, 2006 or so, the Republicans realized that to compete with the Democratic Party in Arkansas, which for many years held every seat, oh, not every seat, but almost every congressional seat. The exception being up in the third district, the Fayetteville area, which was traditionally a Republican area, and that goes all the way back to the Civil War and
But would
Reconstruction.
you say that's still true today with the demographic shifts in Bentonville and Fayetteville and so many folks moving in and maybe, and a college town up there too?
Yeah, it's become slightly less red, more pink, I would say, but
Interesting that it's
still,
still pink. That's a surprise. Okay.
yeah, yeah. And with it's the fastest growing part of the state, as you pointed out. It's the headquarters for Walmart and Tyson Foods and other corporations in that part of the state. And you would think, having the flagship university of the state, that the politics of that area would be a little more progressive. And in many ways, they are more progressive than some of the other districts. But still, uh, when I moved to the state, that was, if you're going to send a Republican to Congress, that's more than likely where they were going to be from. Today, all four seats, first, second, third, fourth district, both Senate seats held by Tom Cotton and John Bozeman, are held by Republicans. Every executive branch official, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, held by Republicans. And the Republicans hold basically a veto-proof majority in both the House and the Senate, with more than two-thirds of the seats in the House and two-thirds in the Senate. The bluest areas of the state would be found in Pulaski County and then down into the Delta, where it happens to be where the majority of our African American population in the state lives. And most of those folks are in the first congressional district.
And Pulaski County is where Little Rock is.
Right, Pulaski County contains Little Rock, which would be considered the largest urban area in the state. And a combination of factors. One is some pretty creative gerrymandering, which every state, whether they're controlled by Democrats or Republicans, will try the best they can to do partisan gerrymandering, which the courts have ruled is okay. Racial gerrymandering, however, is not. But there's a real fine line between partisan gerrymandering and racial gerrymandering, given the fact that African Americans in this state, and of course just about everywhere, make up a sizable part of the Democratic coalition. But starting about 2015 or so, one theory is that the Republicans figure out, well, if we want to grow into a really competitive party with the Democrats, we need to focus on grassroots politics. So Democrats made a conscious effort to get control of school boards and city councils, uh, county government, which in Arkansas goes by this arcane name. You remember quorum courts, which have
Yes.
nothing to do with the courts. That's basically what in most states they call the county executive or the county board. But gradually they built, that's one theory, they built this coalition and started grooming individuals who would run for Congress and state office and be more prepared for it. The second theory is a lot more simpler and can be explained in two words: Barack Obama.
Yeah.
Uh, and of course, you can't ignore the fact that as our first African American president, and hopefully not the last, that raised a lot of ire of Southern Democrats, and particularly in Arkansas. There was a more than 20% flip from the 2004 election to the 2008 election. Democrat to in 2004, the state did vote for John McCain, but in 2008, well, I'm sorry, in 2008 they voted for John McCain, whereas they had voted for George W. Bush in 2004, but the percentage increased by more than 20%. And Eddie, I haven't talked to you about this, but you know, when President Obama was elected, for a brief shining moment, I thought, thank God, finally we've elected somebody of color, a person of color, to serve in the White House. Finally, thank the Lord, we are going to get past all this, and we're going to be a unified country where race doesn't matter. And
Right, that myth of post-racial America, which lasted
exactly,
about two two seconds.
that's why I don't make predictions anymore unless they're really safe. But I just thought this is great. We're going to live in post-racial, post-race America, everything, and just the opposite happened. That Obama's presidency for 8 years polarized us even more, leading to, in many respects, the candidacy and election of Donald Trump as president in 2016.
You know,
So that's this to me. That's the simpler explanation. Others in the state would say, well, it has to do with grooming and building these coalitions. I think it has as much to do with race as anything. And you can see that what's happening in the state right now with Kamala Harris, that she's not going to carry the state. And, they can't look past the race. Forget the fact that she's a woman. A lot of our Kansans can't look past the fact, again, that a person of color might be serving as chief executive.
so I mean, and the philosophical theory I lean on, and this is, I think race is always the most ubiquitous thing in the room that takes place, and the fact that, to your latter point, America can't handle the idea that a person of color, particularly a black person, can occupy the White House, and the dangers that could present, particularly in terms of this rise of white anxiety, right? Because we already know by 20, I think like 2041, 42, white folks for the first time in this country's history will be in a minority. And then when I think back to
Hey,
even
I want you to know something. I know that day's coming. I was always on your side.
look, when I'm running whatever I think I may be running, which I'm not sure I'll be running anything, I will keep you in mind.
Thank you.
Trust me. I always like to think of myself as some intellectual revolutionist, but that day may actually come one day. Arkansas is interesting in that when I was going to school in Arkansas, and back when I had courses with you, I remember walking across campus of Harding University and seeing Mike Huckabee, who was always on campus at Harding University. And folks, if you don't know much about Harding University, it's, just speaking for myself, I don't speak for my guests, it's a bit of a, not everyone there, but it's kind of right-wing conservative, kind of got his mission a long time ago, being anti-communist, anti-socialist. And yet, Mike Huckabee, when he was governor of Arkansas, one of the things that allowed him to be in the position that he was in is for the fact that he was seen as this particular populist that even some black folks leaned into him, which I'm not going to get into that too much. And he even promoted socialist welfare programs like Our Kids First, really manifesting the idea that everyone should have health care. And yet we get to Barack, a black man who advances the Affordable Care Act, and folks, and correct me if I'm wrong, Professor Elrod, in the state of Arkansas, they went crazy calling him a communist and a socialist, and how could he do this? And yet they were pushing for Mike Huckabee wants to be president of the United States.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a conundrum, and I think having that R, after your name might be the only thing that matters. And here's an example of what, in terms of the racial polarization in the 2022 governor's race. The two candidates were Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the daughter of former Governor Mike Huckabee, who had the only political experience she had was serving as President Trump's press secretary for 3 years, something like that, about that amount of time. Her opponent, Chris Jones, likewise was a newcomer to politics, but was an ordained pastor, had a PhD in physics, I believe. His wife is a medical doctor. I could be wrong about that, but I think she's an MD. So he's a very well educated, very articulate candidate. Campaigned everywhere in the state. He's African American, and ended up, and I'm sure that was a factor in his, running for governor. I don't have any polling data on that, but the fact that Sanders carried 63% of the vote must have been based on something more than name recognition.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So in Arkansas, here we are in the 21st century, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be naive or anything like that. But what role does race play in a lot of the decision making that takes place, and particularly even attitudes and behavior among Arkansans down there here in the year 2024?
Well, I would divide it into several different camps. I think you've got your old hardcore, and I'm sure they still exist in Alabama too, unreconstructed Southerners that still look back on the ancient history of the Civil War, and that the South will rise again and all that. And that's where this angst about the strong arm of the federal government interfering with state and local politics comes from. And then I think another group, and this is what gives me some degree of hope, not just for Arkansas and the South, but for the whole country, are the students that I teach at UCA, which you mentioned about Harding was a fairly diverse place, but most of the people of color we had there came from overseas, right?
No, yeah, absolutely right. Well, and even that, the medium by which they made their way here was still kind of a conservative arm.
Yeah. I remember and I bet you fell into this category too, that it was like a joke with my African American students, particularly male students. The first thing somebody would ask them is, well, what sport do you play?
Do you know how many times I got that question? I'll never check this out. I will never forget. I was in this upper level English lit course. We're studying Joseph Conrad and some other folks, and I was taking this in the English department. There was a seminar course, and I'm a big Joseph Conrad fan for a lot of complicated reasons. But won't get into that. I made this comment in class about really my critique of Conrad. I walked out of class, and his white sister said to me, "Wow, I didn't know that about you, Eddie." And I sat there and I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she goes, "I mean, just that comment, that thought, and then reading your stuff and everything, I just thought, And I said, "I'm here to play football." Right. In 20, I want to say it was in 2014, maybe 2015, I was at the airport traveling back down south. And I'm in Boston Logan Airport, and I had a Harding University shirt. I don't have too many of those things hanging around these days. And the white lady walks up to me and she goes, "You went to Harding?" I said, "Yeah, yeah. Did you?" She goes, "Yeah." She goes, "What sport did you play?" And this is like 2014, 15, 16, something like that. And I was like, "I got you."
Well,
I got
I have to admit, I have a little prejudice that way too. When I have a student in class here from at UCA who's from Texas, I will ask them what sport they play.
Is it because of their race or because they're from Texas and that's just what
Oh, it's
they
because they're from Texas.
That's
It's
what
got
I'm
nothing
saying,
to
right?
do.
It's football then God, or football pickup trucks, guns then God down in Texas.
Yeah. Well, just to get back to the point I was making is that so at UCA, and there's no disrespect to Harding because it's a good place, and it produces scholars like you and many other people that I had the pleasure to work with over the years. But the difference is the diversity I see at a public college. And I tell my students occasionally that you look around you, this may be the most diverse group of people you ever work with, because once you hit the workforce or find a job, uh, you may find your tribe too. And so this is the time where it's a good time to learn what it's like to walk in somebody else's skin,
Mm-hmm.
or to understand not just race but also poverty, or what it's like to grow up in a very conservative Baptist household and break it to your parents that you're gay,
Mm-hmm.
um, which that's a tough row. But look around you, you're going to see people very different than you. And I tell my fellow boomers every once in a while that I'm so impressed with how younger people, say your age and younger, are a lot more in tune with diversity. That ridiculing somebody, say, who's on the spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
or somebody who has a disability, or somebody's a different race or from a different country, won't get teased about it. And that was pretty common, and when I growing up in the '60s and '70s. Yeah, if people weren't white, they were different than us, and we could tease them a little. So that I would put it in two camps. And when the older camp that is holding on to the past and saying, that this state is for white people, and others who saying, well, hold on a second, the world is changing, and we need to learn how to accept the other. We don't have to always agree with the other, but
Absolutely.
learn how to accept and know how to listen to people who are different than we are.
But off that point though, and just something I want to ask you about, having lived in, gone to school and lived in Arkansas for a while and everything too, if myself and my white wife said, hey, you know what, let's creep back down to Arkansas. How comfortable in the 21st century would we feel, particularly with the changing of the political dynamics that's there? Would a brother like me feel safe who I congregate, my best friends are transgender folks. I
Yeah,
hang out with folks who are gay, who are lesbian, who are bisexual. I lean into some thought-provoking individuals who only thing they care about is how do we challenge the status quo to make sure everyone feel inclusive? Would we feel welcome? Would those folks feel welcome in a place where when I read the newspaper and Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders is really pushing for anti-Black legislation, starting off with the issues of we're not going to teach AP African American Studies in this state.
yeah,
I see that stuff and I think, I don't think I can go back to Arkansas.
yeah. Um, I don't know what to tell you about that, other than there are places where if you're an interracial couple, or you're gay, or um, trans, you go, man, what difference does it make who somebody is? But and I would say, unfortunately, I live in one of those communities. Conway seems to be pretty accepting of diversity. Um, we've had some battles with the school board about books and
Mhm.
teaching critical race theory. I was You'll appreciate this. I work in a program during the summer called Arkansas Governor's School for gifted and talented high school students, and I tell them, I shouldn't out myself. Fortunately, nobody in Arkansas is going to hear this. It's just people in Massachusetts. But I tell them on the first day of class, one of the things I'm not supposed to talk about is critical race theory,
Mhm.
unless you ask me about it. Now, if you ask me about it, I can talk about it. And sooner or later, our hand goes up. What is critical race theory? So I'm glad
At
you asked me about it. Let's talk about that.
least
Because
they're
I think
honest.
with that term, and I don't have empirical data. I think 90% of the people who use it, throw that term out, critical race theory, have no idea what it means.
Absolutely.
They hear the word critical and they think it means to be critical, like I don't like the color of your hair. I don't like your the music you listen to, or it's something like that. Instead of being associated with critical thinking, which should bring us, and that's the most important thing I should be doing as an educator. And I'm in agreement with Governor Huckabee about that, who has said, a teacher's mission or a school's mission should teach people how to think, not what to think. Well, Governor Sanders, that's what I do when I talk, when I do critical thinking. If you gave me the chance to at least mention what critical race theory is, I think I could do it in an objective way
Mm-hmm.
without saying, white people are bad, which is, I think, what the fear is, that if you teach critical race theory, you're saying, let's start off with this point that, all white people are bad and they're the devil and everything like that.
Which we know is just simply not the case at
No,
all.
no.
Not true at all.
So I think a lot of, and we talked about this earlier, but a lot of it has to do with, educating people,
Mm-hmm.
and saying, what difference does it make? Well, it's like Tim Walz has said, some things just aren't any of your business. Like who somebody loves, or how somebody wants to share themselves with the world, or if they feel comfortable in their own body or their own skin, then that's their life, that's their world. But the thing that encourages me, and I hope my students at UCA will take this on the rest of their life, and that college will really change them, to say, yeah, I sat next to this a guy in my class. He was a really nice guy. And I found out he was gay, and you know what? It didn't make any difference at all to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he was still a nice guy. I
Absolutely.
liked him, and we did our homework together, and everything was fine.
It's as we think about this and we think about issues of demographics and the politics of demographics and everything. When I look at what's happening, particularly what's transpiring nationally and everything too, I find it interesting that there are a number of Black scholars, folks that I hang out with, that when I go to conferences and stuff, a lot of papers are being discussed and written on, and that is, does America have an emerging Black and brown problem? Particularly when we think about the fact that while you do have a number of Black African American folks who, you have some, I won't say a lot, but a small percentage, who will vote Republican, who will support Trump, you have a growing number of folks who are identified as Hispanic, Latina, Latinx, a larger growing community who will vote for Trump and Republicans over religious, different values. And oftentimes we want to group Black and brown folks together, but we're not at
Yeah,
all. And
even
we're starting
even
to
the,
see that in politics.
yeah, even the Hispanic community is not monolithic in terms of how they vote. Cubans tend to vote very, the litmus test is there: do you support normalizing relations with Cuba? Boom. That then they know whether they're not going to vote for you. And then there's uh, the Latin American community that immigrated here following all the rules of immigration. And my understanding is that that's the group that is more likely to coalesce around the MAGA wing of the Republican Party, because they say all these people coming in here illegally from Venezuela and Mexico and other parts of the South, global South, that they're not doing it the right way, or not doing it the way they should. But you know what? And this bugs the heck out of me, because I did some work when I was in Harding when I was at Harding in Haiti. The
Oh, I
people,
remember after the earthquakes down there.
yeah, uh, the people in Springfield, Ohio, the Haitians there, they followed the rules. They didn't cross the border between Haiti and Ohio, because there isn't one. They came into the country legally as refugees, and they were taken in by the people of Ohio and Springfield, Ohio. But still, the MAGA wing of the Republican Party made an issue out of them and said, they don't belong here. Well, they did everything like you told them to. I mean, they followed all the rules. And so again, what? Well, they're the
Race.
other. There's race, yeah. That, I mean, if these were refugees from Scotland or Switzerland, yeah, they're good old white people here working in our factories and doing. But the thing is, Eddie, you gotta tell me what you think of this. What is a black job?
Woo. If you know, will you please tell me?
Yeah,
Right?
he said the quiet part out loud.
Right. So a black job.
They're coming here to take black jobs, and they said, "Well, what is a black job?" Well, it's
I
any,
I I want to know. You tell me.
yeah,
I mean, that's an interesting position right
yeah.
there.
I mean, name a job, it's a black job, right? But I think he was basically saying when we think about menial work,
Absolutely.
that's what he meant. He would never admit that he said that in that interview.
I mean, because someone who looks like me, you know, can't have a work ethic or can't even possess a mind, as Ralph Ellison would say, an invisible man, really,
Yeah,
to negotiate some of those things and everything. That point you bring up, and we're seeing this heightened awareness to politics that's happening. I'm still struck though that I think I've been saying for years the Republican parties have a, and I'll say this, and I want your thought. The Republican Party has a problem, and the fact that the Republican Party has become a part of somewhat of a cult of personality, that they don't even know ideologically what they believe or their mission. Is some of it sometimes seems predicated just on hate. So that's my thought of the Republican Party. My thought of the Democratic Party, right? Because I mean, I'm an academic. I can be objective here too. Is that the Democrats, and we've heard this for a long time. Well, people who look like Eddie, they're not going to vote for a Republican, so we can just say we're going to do whatever we're going to do, even if we do nothing.
yeah.
That's there. I love your 2 cents on both of those commentaries.
Well, I think the thing about being in a cult is you don't know you're in a cult, right? You don't
Oh,
know.
that's true.
You don't, and you're like somebody once said, you're drinking the Kool-Aid, you don't even know what flavor it is. And but with respect to the Democratic Party, I agree that since the African American vote is something they could count on, now turnout's going to be important in this race. Turnout in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Detroit and other part where they need a big turnout. That's important. But I think there is something to be said for that. Much like Republicans seem to always take the Christian evangelical vote for granted, right? That they talk about abortion but never do anything about it. Now Donald Trump, allegedly was the one that changed all that. But yeah, the cult thing really bothers me, and I'll make another prediction.
Oh, you caught my attention again.
Okay, if the Democrats win this presidential election, the Republicans will do what they've done after every election going back probably to when Clinton was elected, and say we've got to do something to make a bigger tent.
Mm.
We've got to do something to attract minorities and specifically people of color and the LGBTQ community. And so my prediction is they'll do that and nothing will be done because what it looks like and this is not sage wisdom from me or anything, but the Republican Party is very rapidly becoming a white person's party, and as you pointed out, that demographic is shrinking. So they can either you know go look for those votes, and that's going to mean do some soul searching about what do we believe as a party, and hoping that will attract people to the Republican Party.
Joe Biden decides to step back, and you growing up not too far away from his hood and kind of closely connected, being from Delaware, which I know you've always talked about how Delaware was the first state, I believe.
Every student that takes my government class has to know that.
And don't try. That's one thing that I remember you always said too. Delaware was the first state, but did, in your honest opinion, did he step down or was he pushed out?
I think it was a combination of things. He's always been a person that leans upon the advice of his family.
Mhm.
And I think his family had something to do. But I think once it was kind of like, not to draw too fine a point on it, but it's kind of like Nixon and Watergate. When Barry Goldwater and Howard Baker show up at the White House and say, "Mr. Nixon, you need to go," and when Democrats he respected started coming to the White House, said, "We're going to lose this race if you stay in it." Um, and I don't, maybe it'll turn out to be a good thing for the Democrats that he had such a bad debate performance.
I
With
tell you, I I personally think so, because I mean, in some ways, she's energized a group of people and has changed a lot of the numbers where Donald Trump was just absolutely destroying Joe Biden. But yet, as we continue to look at this too, I've also been struck by the fact that this race really comes down to, I think, two things. And you pointed out one of those things. One, particularly for Kamala Harris in states like Pennsylvania, for example, will Black people turn out to vote for her? The second thing, independence. Right. And sometimes it always seems like, where do independents fall in line on some of this stuff
oh,
too?
are you talking about real independents or undecided voters?
I'm sorry. I would say real independents and undecided voters.
Yeah, I've got a thing about undecided voters 30 days from an election.
Yeah, if you
I,
haven't figured it out
I
by now.
think this is going to be real cynical. I think they're in it for the coffee and the donuts. Like, hey, we found this undecided voter, and you're sitting in a cafe in Wisconsin, and so tell us what you think about the election. Well, I haven't made up my mind. And they're really there for the coffee and donuts. The fact that they're getting attention from everybody because every vote is critical here.
Mhm.
But I think for the most part, what I've heard and what I've read, independents are not entirely turned on by Kamala Harris, but that Donald Trump is certainly not expanding his number of voters beyond the MAGA. I don't want to call it a cult. I don't like using the word cult, but
That's my
um,
and I introduced that word to us today.
I
So
know a cult is any group that you don't like or you don't understand, right? And yesterday's cult is today's mainstream movement, right?
that's fair. That's a good point.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, I don't know any way to describe it, but the dead enders or whatever. I mean, what has he said in the last 8 years, 7 years that goes beyond what he said in 2016 that would attract more independent-minded voters to him? And it still amazes me that the economy is doing a lot better. The numbers under Biden are much better than they were under Trump. Inflation's bad, but there's not much presidents can really do about that. Um, I just don't get it. I don't get why there has been more of dramatic shift towards Biden and Kamala Harris. The other thing about this race that fascinates me is, when I uh, teach about the office of the president, I point out the vice presidents are kind of, I don't know, that somebody once said they have two jobs: is to preside over the Senate and check daily on the health of the president, right? And it's not like, and the Republicans are smart about this. They're making it sound like she's been president for the last 3 years.
Yes,
All
yes.
the policies about the border and Ukraine and problems in the Middle East and all in the economy. It's all her. Got nothing to do with gridlock in Congress or the fact that she wasn't president. Joe Biden was president. That's typically what happens. The same thing happened to Al Gore, when he ran.
Yeah, because I
Uh,
think Al Gore, he failed to carry Tennessee in the 2000 election, I believe, right? I mean, and then that's right. I mean, if you think about that for a little bit, had Al Gore carried Tennessee, we wouldn't have had to lean on Florida for the final decision because he didn't even carry his own state. And
Yeah,
some people would say, and again, kind of going back here a little bit, and you know more about this than I do, and that is the fact that that had to do with the fact that Al Gore underestimated how popular Bill Clinton still was when he kind of tried to distance himself from him.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I don't think Kamala Harris has done that. I think she's been willing to accept the fact that I was part of a team, but it wasn't like she was personally down there on the border opening the wall and saying, "Come on, everybody, come in. Everybody who wants to live here, come on in."
You know, it's when we think about these polling and everything too, as we start to get to the end of Race Matters. And folks, thank you for chiming in here. I'm Eddie Carson, and I have Professor Mark Elrod from the University of Central Arkansas, UCA, down in Conway, Arkansas, here with us on the show. You know, I since the 2016 election, I no longer trust polls. And one of the reasons why, and please inform me, is because sometimes I think they ask people who are not going to turn out, who are not going to vote,
Yeah.
uh, and they skew the poll data. And we saw how messed up the 2016 elections were. You know, any thoughts on that, especially with polling data and everything?
Well, a poll, the one thing is a poll is not a crystal ball, and it can only tell you what's going on right now at this moment. And in some cases, what people were thinking 3 days ago when the poll was taken. And the from what I don't do a lot of polling work, but from what I remember from my courses where I was taught this, the closer the race, the more difficult it is to predict because it's within that margin of error. And I think in the case of what happened in 2016 was Democrats thought they pulled a John Dewey or Thomas Dewey, I'm sorry,
Thomas, yes.
in 48, who, he
With
was so far,
Truman.
they just stopped taking polls. They said, we got this made. And at the last minute, as well, we saw in 2016, the undecideds broke for Trump. And in spite of the fact that Hillary's workers in Michigan were saying, we need help, get some work up here. We need to knock doors. We need to step up our
She
ground.
ignored Michigan.
What's that?
And I believe she ignored Michigan. Am I right, Hillary?
Well, she campaigned there, but in the final weeks, they just kind of thought, okay, we got Michigan in the bag, and
Okay.
didn't, they took their foot off the gas pedal. But I don't see the Harris campaign doing that this time. I think they learned their lesson from that. But yeah, this hasn't been a good season for pollsters. And I think that they do, when you look at a poll, you need to look at the margin of error. You need to look at, was it likely voters? Uh, did they include people who have cell phones? Um, who exactly was contacted in the poll? And I haven't seen a poll in Arkansas in probably about a month was the last time uh, Hendrix College does one, and it showed everything. Is basically the state is going red. So nobody's going to waste money on a poll in a state like
Or
Arkansas. Maybe I doubt New Hampshire is getting a lot of polling done there about. I mean, I'm sorry, not New Hampshire, Vermont.
no. No, I mean it's interesting too because you look at a place like Vermont. Vermont is just it's blue. And as I told you before, I'm intrigued by the state of Vermont because Vermont, in many ways, Vermont, I'm going to say this, and boy, people can complain about this comment because there's a falsity here, but I'm just going to say it. I mean, Vermont in some ways is like Arkansas, except for Vermont is much more overwhelmingly white. Both states are very rural. Vermont is overwhelmingly more rural than Arkansas. And yet, Vermont is an interesting state because Vermont is such a blue state, but yet it's a state with a Democratic governor. I'm sorry, a Republican governor. Then you look at Massachusetts up until Maura Healey for the longest period of time. If you're a Republican running for office in Massachusetts, you're going to struggle. You're not. Massachusetts is only going to vote nationally for a Democratic candidate, but yet Charlie Baker, who's now over the NCAA, was a longtime governor in the state of Massachusetts. Then you get to states like Kentucky, a red state with a Democratic governor. Those things they just always intrigue me how people make these decisions and differentiate. And sometimes you wonder, are they making them ideologically, or are these governors have to lean into kind of a populist narrative to serve folks, something that maybe we should see at the national level? But I don't know. I'm always intrigued by that.
Yeah, yeah. Those states that or states that have split legislatures, like the Democrats control the House and the Republicans control
Absolutely.
always interesting. And you know what? That may go to the fact that I've heard it said that deep down inside, Americans like divided government
I've
because
heard that for a
it's
long time.
less effective.
Yes. Yeah, well, I mean, and it really has. We've seen times where Democrats have controlled everything, even at the national level, nothing got done. Trump and Republicans control the House, Senate, and the White House for a while, and they still could get nothing done.
Right.
So, Professor Elrod, it has been great having you here on Race Matters. And like I always like to do with all of my guests, I want to give you the last word on anything you want. My last word will be, I hope Jeff Baker and Philip Young are listening, and since we gave them a shout out, and I hope y'all are wrestling with your Alabama Vanderbilt situation that's there, but that's whatever y'all want to do. Professor Elrod, I want to give you the last word.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and like I try to tell my son every time I talk to him, I'm very proud of you, Eddie. And when I hear about my former students doing great things, I think, well, they did well in spite of me, in spite of everything I taught them. But there's nothing better than, and you ask any teacher this, that to see their former students doing well and uh, trying to make a change in this world. But anyway, I've got the best job in the world. Every day I get to talk to impressionable people and trying to encourage them to be better critical thinkers and re-examine, what what they've been taught all their life to think about politics. And like again, I agree with Governor Sanders, saying that our job should be to get people to think, not teach them what to think. And I've never tried to do that. So anyway, it's been a pleasure, and hope we get to do it again sometime.
Brother, I hope so. Folks, this is Race Matters. We're here at WJOP Joppa Radio, Newburyport, Massachusetts. Hope you've enjoyed the conversation. Be well, and I hope to see you, hear from you next episode.